Hey Lake Point, Pastor Michael here to get you caught up on the second week of our series, Faith That Works. It's a series where we're taking a look at the writings of Jesus' half-brother, James. Why? Because we want a faith that is practical and meaningful, a faith that actually works. And James provides us with a framework for a faith just like that. In James chapter 1, verse 5, we read that if you need wisdom, ask our generous God and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. Essentially, James is saying that instead of panicking when problems come your way, seek the Lord for wisdom because he wants to generously give it to you. And so the first question Nate explored is, well, what is wisdom? And what he shared is that wisdom is knowing what to do. It's knowing and doing the right thing. And wisdom is different than knowledge. You see, knowledge is theoretical, wisdom is practical. Knowledge is knowing the truth, wisdom is knowing how to apply it. Knowledge fills your mind, wisdom guides your life. Knowledge provides information, while wisdom provides transformation. Knowledge tells you what to believe, wisdom tells you how to behave. Wisdom is what helps keep us grounded when the storms of life come our way. And wisdom is what James tells us we need to ask God for when those storms come. However, check out what James writes next in verses 6 to 8. He says, "But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything that they do." James, he begins this part of the passage by saying that if we need wisdom to seek God, and he will give generously to us, which is very comforting and reassuring. But then James goes on to say that if your faith is not solely in God alone, you won't receive anything from the Lord because as far as James is concerned, you are unstable and double-minded and not worthy to receive such wisdom. And so the second question that Nate explored is, what does it mean to not waver in your faith? What's James getting at here? Unfortunately, a lot of people think not wavering means that we have to believe in God and not entertain any doubt or unbelief. In a lot of ways, we equate it to positive thinking, where you are forbidden to visualize or imagine anything other than a positive outcome. But thankfully, the biblical concept of faith has nothing to do with your emotions or imagination or your visualizations. It's simply about one thing: obedience. To not waver in your faith means to obey, to trust God enough to do what he says, regardless of what you think or how you feel. It has little to do with your thoughts and a lot to do with your actions. Time and time again, James reinforces the idea that our faith in God is evidenced by our behavior. It's why James says such a person's loyalty is divided between God and the world. It's because they are treating God as if he's some sort of consultant. Do you know how a consultant works? I mean, you pay them money to come and give you advice. And once they leave, you're free to either follow or ignore their advice based on whether or not you like it. But Pastor James says that's not the way it works with God. He is not a consultant, he's God. And when you ask God for wisdom, you better intend to do what he says and not waver or doubt, or else he isn't going to give you any. We can't do life God's way and our way at the same time. Yet many people try to obey the parts of the Bible that they like while ignoring the parts they don't like. It was a problem in James's day, and it's a persistent problem in ours. Inconsistent faith where Christians say one thing yet they do another. It's why, as Nate shared, the book of James is so helpful to all generations of Christians because it calls us to live out what we say we believe. We can say we believe in the Bible, but the truth is that we only believe the parts that we actually put into practice. It's why James talks so much about wisdom. If we're truly seeking out God's guidance, then it will be evident by how we live our lives. In James chapter 3, verse 13, James writes this. He says, "If you are wise and understand God's ways, prove it by living an honorable life, doing good works with the humility that comes from wisdom." What does James say a life of wisdom looks like? He says it's a moral uprightness. It's shunning evil and doing what is right and fair. Not convinced? Look at what James says next. He says the wisdom from above is first of all pure, It is also peace-loving and gentle at all times and willing to yield to others. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. Time and time again, throughout the book of James, James is closely connecting wisdom to righteousness and faith to action. Why? Because God wants us to have a faith that actually works, that actually makes a difference in our lives and in the lives of those around us. Well, friends, consider yourselves caught up. Be sure to put your faith to work and enjoy chatting with your group about the discussion questions. See you next time as we continue to explore the book of James.